very warm welcome to you all. My name is Bilal Aftab, and it is my privilege to moderate today's critical discussion on a subject that touches the lives of millions and shapes the future of our nation. We are here to delve into the theme of infrastructural imbalances amid rapid urbanization in Pakistan. It is pertinent to note that our cities are at the crossroads. They are experiencing the fastest urban growth in South Asia, driven by migration from areas affected by conflict, climate vulnerability, and the search for livelihood. This unprecedented influx is a profound test of urban resilience, testing whether our cities can absorb these shocks while continuing to provide essential services. At the heart of this challenge lies urban infrastructure, the systems of transport, water, housing, and public services that form the backbone of city life. And when these systems fail to keep pace, we see severe imbalances, inequities, and governance gaps. The very promise of the city as a place of refuge and opportunity is at stake. To guide us through this complex issue, we are fortunate to have an exceptional panel of experts today. Ms. Fauzia Rizwan, Director of the Urban Solutions Private Limited, who brings practical, on-the-ground expertise in urban planning and development. Ms. Risham Amjad, Consultant with the Asian Development Bank, and a specialist in urban and environmental policy and planning from Tufts University, who will offer insights into policy and environmental integration. And Dr. Shafaat Nawaz, RASTA Fellow and Fulbright PhD from the University of Iowa, Chicago. Dr. Nawaz will set the stage by framing the scale of the challenge and the systematic imbalances that we face as a nation. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Shafaat Nawaz to begin our session. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I am Shafaat Nawaz. As Bilal just mentioned, thank you so much for that. I recently completed my PhD in urban planning and policy from University of Illinois in Chicago. In my doctoral research, I focused on the intersection of urban economies and urban planning. So what I do in my research is that I look at the regional interactions of the local industrial clusters in Pakistan as well as South Asia, and how they are linked with the global economy. And there's a literature of global value chains and global production networks that engages with this discussion. So worldwide, you can also say that I interact with the topics of economic geography. So with that background, in my opening remarks for today, what I'm trying to do is to set the context for reframing how we see urbanization in Pakistan. And the core argument of my discussion is a simple but possibly unsettling question, which is that what if Pakistan is not gradually becoming urban, but we are already a very urbanized country? And if it is true, then what it means is that there is a mismatch between the urban reality in Pakistan and the official perception of how urban we are, on which our planning systems, our fiscal instruments, and our infrastructural investments are planned and implemented. And this is what possibly leads to infrastructural imbalances that I'm hoping that we can talk more about and learn from our expert panelists here. So there is an official narrative about how urban Pakistan is. Pakistan Bureau of Statistics reported that 39% of Pakistan's population is urban. If we believe this number, what it means is that Pakistan's urbanization is a gradual and manageable process. And that is why our policy documents, our planning, and policy instruments are designed and shaped around this 39% of urban population number. This framing underpins most of the national and provincial policy documents, development budgets, and sectoral investments. But the critical question that we are confronted with, and that I aim to present to you all today, is that what if this number of 39% is flawed? This question was developed by Cabanillas et al. In their 2025 working paper, which just came out a few months back by the World Bank Group. In this paper, they did not rely on the official administrative boundaries of urban areas in Pakistan, which Pakistan Bureau of Statistics relies on. But they came up with a new, not new in its own right, because it's already developed by the UN. But in Pakistani scenario, they implemented that approach, which is the degrees of urbanization, DOU approach. This approach, as I mentioned, does not rely on the official definitions of urban and rural areas, but it is based on satellite imagery, population density, and built-up areas. When they applied this approach to measure how much urban Pakistan is, the result was a dramatic surge because they reported that 88% of Pakistan is urban. Now, this dramatic number has successfully sparked up discussions in Pakistan, including like the one we are having right now. But I must say that their results are not without critique. I'm personally conducting an independent study here at PIDE, in which I'm trying to verify and replicate their findings. I already have some opinions about this topic, and we can talk more about it if the conversation develops that way. Nevertheless, in my opinion, there is one contribution of this study that I completely agree with, which is that they suggest that over the 4 decades, Pakistan's population grew from 78 million to more than 222 million. That's what we do agree on. But the new addition that they do is that most of Pakistan's urban population is not is not concentrated only in the major urban centers or megacities, if you may, like Karachi and Lahore. But what they suggest is that 46% of Pakistan's urban population does live in these megacities, but another 42% is residing in second tier and smaller and intermediate cities. In my opinion, the reason why this is a wonderful contribution of this study is because it helps us reframe the way we look at our second tier and intermediate cities in Pakistan. In terms of their governance, infrastructural investments, and their socio-political role. These secondary cities in Pakistan are now equally urban cumulatively as the megacities of the first tier, but they are not given that similar kind of policy importance in the slightest. So this inaccuracy of having more than double, so 39% and 88% is more than the double. If the variation was a few numbers up or down, we would have believed that number, but more than the double raises some eyebrows, right? But at the same time, this inaccuracy, so one of them has to be right, or maybe the right number might be somewhere in the middle, but even in the middle is going to be a big jump from 39% or a big drop from 88%, right? So this inaccuracy or this mismatch leads us to the central problem of today's seminar, which is that there is a structural mismatch between how fast possibly our cities have already grown and how slowly and gradually our infrastructure systems are being expanded and financed. And the result is the infrastructural imbalances. And the symptoms of this mismatch and these imbalances are visible everywhere in the form of traffic congestion, housing shortage, water scarcity, waste accumulation, worsening air quality, to name just a few, right? While these resulting infrastructure imbalances are many, I'm trying to give example of a few of those. And starting with the first one, which is housing. It has been reported that there is a shortage of 9 million housing units in Pakistan. This number has been debated. In our 2022 book published here at PIDE about housing, we actually retest this number. And we developed our argument that the housing problem in Pakistan is not of the sheer number of housing units or the land to be available for developing housing. But the issue is of access, affordability, and equity to the most vulnerable populations. And because of these affordability concerns, the result is that more than 50% of our urban residents are living in informal settlements or in below the standard housing quality, without any kind of land tenure or basic services like water access or even utility connections in most of the cases, which are only provided on a leapfrog basis and connections and uh, references. But I must say that these issues are most visible at the municipal scale. Pakistan's municipal governments are critically under-resourced. Let's look at the example of water availability, for example. Worldwide, the standard is that water availability is about 30 to 50 gallons per person per day. But in Pakistan, it averages to only 5 to 10 gallons a day for every person. And this issue is further exacerbated by the equity and accessibility issues, as evident by the fact that only 65% of households in the 10 large Pakistani cities have access to piped water. And even of those, about 40% is lost in different kind of mechanisms. Similarly, the accumulation of heaps of garbage on our city streets, open lots, and drains is a common problem that we face daily. This is because our solid waste collection system is only 39%, while it is 71% in other comparable countries. And to add to the misery, we are a very populous country. We produce a lot of garbage annually, estimated at more than 30 million tons. And the worst news is that it's only expected to increase in the future. Um, it seems that our administration and our government has long ignored or given less importance to the critical urban governance function of city planning. This profession is supposed to guide the governments in terms of their city development as well as administration. The major policy tool for this purpose is master planning. And we have an expert with us today who I hope that will give us more guidance on the topic. But these master plans are supposed to guide our city governments about the infrastructural investments, land use, housing, transport, and core services. But because most of our cities are functioning without master plans, that adds to the issue of failing core services in our municipal governments. The next consequence of these infrastructural imbalances that I do want to highlight is that it's not only restricted to the physical infrastructure, if you may, but it's also causing adverse impacts to the public health. And this number, it makes me sad to quote this number, that air pollution provides a stark example of how more than 200,000 Pakistanis are dying prematurely because of air pollution and worsening air quality. And I'm hoping that our environmental specialist here can talk more about this issue, because Pakistan seems to have one of the worst air qualities in the world right now. Plus, it's also causing us, money. It's estimated that air quality deterioration is costing us up to 6.5% of our GDP, which is quite a number for a country of this size. At the same time, our governance arrangements have struggled to keep pace with our urban complexity. In waters such as water, sanitation, and hygiene, responsibilities in Pakistan are fragmented across multiple agencies. Financing is heavily dependent on external donors, and long-term maintenance is often neglected. Again, our example of floods is also another stark example of how we are a country which is exposed to these climate shocks in a very pronounced way. For example, 2022 floods in Sindh deteriorated 50% of our urban water systems. And reports from 2025 floods are not encouraging in their own right. But I do want to come back to that issue of whether 39% or 88%, which of these numbers is believable, right? But if our official definitions and its resulting 39% number is really flawed, then it highlights the underlying constraints that our municipal governments are facing, and which is leading to these infrastructure imbalances that I've just highlighted. Um, uh, our municipal governments are fiscally starved. And the reason for that is that in Pakistan, our local government acts and laws in all of the provinces uh, give our governments the guidance to make up the boundaries of urban areas, but those definitions are obsolete. So what happens is that most of those houses which are developed just outside of those boundaries are not categorized as urban. Because of this miscategorization or wrong demarcation, many of the properties which are supposed to be urban are not classified as urban, and they are not expected to pay property taxes. And because of this, our governments are losing out on a lot of revenue that could be generated from those um, peri-urban developments, if so to speak. But at the same time, these peri-urban developments, which are not officially part of the urban boundaries but are right next to it, are expecting that our city governments provide them with all those services which urban areas and residents are getting, right? What our governments are being confronted with is that our municipal offices are being expected to give services to far more number of people at far larger areas in comparison to far fewer resources than what they are required to do this challenging task. Um, Another number that I must quote is the way our cities are expanding. Our population is increasing at just under 2% rate, but our cities are growing at up to 7% of rate, which means that we don't really need to grow that much outside, but we are doing that. It's a US like model of suburban and peri-urban developments that we have started following in this country, but we must know that we don't have enough size in our country and not enough resources to follow that model. So this pattern of low density expansion dramatically increases the cost that our municipal governments are being confronted with to provide water, sanitation, transport, and energy to these sparsely populated yet contiguous urban areas. At this point, the question that we are confronted with is not whether a reform is needed in this sector, but instead where to start. And I do have an opinion here. And what I suggest is that one of the most formal and immediately impactful steps here is the formal reclassification of urban areas to match the urban reality. Why does this reclassification matter that I am proposing? Because it would change how these urban areas are governed and financed. It would take all those houses which are now sitting outside of the urban boundaries and all those areas, but right next to it, into the new urban boundaries. And by doing that, we will increase the tax revenue that our local governments and municipal governments can earn from it. And in response to it, because and studies have already estimated that they can increase their revenue by up to 7 times, not just 7%, up to 7 times. And that's a big increase by 700%. So what our municipal governments will be able to do is that they will be able to provide with better services because they'll have more funds generated from those urban residents which are already sitting there and enjoying those services in any way, right? Um, so, in my opinion, this reclassification is not just a technical adjustment, but it is a foundational governance reform that we need. So this brings us to a clear policy choice. Under the current approach, Pakistan continues to be treated as only 39% urban, less than half, and our policy remains focused on formal city limits. And the outcome is what we face today, in the form of fiscal stress, service breakdowns, growing inequality, and increasing vulnerability to climate and economic shocks. But the alternative path, if we do reclassify these areas, is where we start recognizing the reality that we might already be a very urban country. And this recognition would allow our policies, budgets, and institutions to align with where people actually live, work, and move. So I would end this introductory talk by saying that changing the way we see Pakistan as urban is not just a statistical correction that is needed at Pakistan Bureau of Statistics, but it's a necessary step that is needed to move towards building cities that are functional, resilient, and capable of supporting economic growth and human well-being. Again, I'm Shafaat Nawaz, and I'm happy to be part of today's panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nawaz, for that compelling and data-driven presentation. Now, one core issue that you've outlined is a profound infrastructural imbalance, where rapid growth has outstripped planning and investment, leading to severe human and economic costs, all rooted in how you term that it as the critical fiscal misclassification, rather. So this now gives our panel a rich foundation for further discussion. And I would particularly request Ms. Fauzia and Ms. Risham to address some follow-up questions based on Dr. Nawaz's presentation. Now, from his presentation, we can see a stark contrast between Pakistan's official urbanization rate of 39% and a World Bank working paper estimate of 88%, as stressed upon. What key methodological, definitional, or geographic factors might explain this? According to you guys, we got Dr. Nawaz's perspective on this, but we would love to hear your perspective on this as well. And what factors might explain this more than double discrepancy? And what implications does such a large variation carry for policymakers and development planning in Pakistan? Ms. Fawzia, if you would like to go first.
That data was a little surprising for me. Being a practicing urban planner, what I come to is you must have gone through the study in detail, and there must have been a definition to urban. That was something that I was looking up to. That how is World Bank or ADB, whatever whichever the organization it was, they're defining urban. Like urban from let's say the late 70s and the late 80s eras was defined as something that is economically defined. Like whether you are relying on the agriculture mode of economic activity or you're relying on the industrial or the non-agriculture mode. That was one definition that was considered. Later on, with urbanization throughout the world, the things that I have studied on, other than economics, it was the administrative unit. How do you define administrative unit? What is the extent you say, okay, 50 square kilometers is an administrative unit that can be governed as an urban entity? No, it's like not like this. Like Paris's law, 14,000 square kilometer. It can be governed as an urban entity. Now there is another definition to it, which is a spatial definition. Then comes the population. What is the population that can be governed as a single urban entity? And when the population comes the infrastructure. And from the infrastructure, I don't only mean the hard infrastructure, the physical infrastructure, I mean the social infrastructure as well, like the schools, the colleges, the health. And then comes the roads and the water supply and the wash facilities. So the thing that I'm trying to understand myself over here is at the base of this study, what was urban? Even today, in the AI world or in the GIS dominated world, just looking at the night light defines urban for some countries, for some cities. So the basic factor for me here is how are we approaching urban here? And if we go, I agree, if we go for a redefinition to this urban context, then we have to be very clear on what we are actually targeting. This should be a discussion, and I think you have opened a very well needed platform. This must be discussed. This should be revised. But in what context? With what definitions we are going? How are we going to define this? Like, Shafat, can you tell me on any background of the study that how did they approach urban? Because I couldn't figure out from the presentation.
Right. I think you're very right in raising this question because when I read that study and being urban planner and having worked in this domain for quite some time, I had similar questions. So what I did is that I went back to that study and started reading it. How are they defining urban? And it was a rabbit hole of references and citations. And I don't entirely want to negate the number, but I do have some skeptical thoughts about the findings, and some critiques of it on which I'm working at the moment. Coming back to how they define urban, they say that they are using human settlement layers data. Now, this data is used by the UN, and it has been recommended by the UN to be used worldwide to have a consistent definition of urban around the world. So then my next question was, where does this data for human settlement layer come from? So I went back to their data source, and they suggest that this data comes from Columbia University Center for, it's skipping my mind, but it's CIERN, a research center at Columbia University. So I went back to their website because now human settlement layer is suggesting I should see that. And I consult that, and they say that data comes from the 2010 census round. Now, this is where I was stunned because in Pakistan, our last census, so after 1997, our next round of census was in 2017. In 2010, we did start an exercise, but it never finished. So there was no census round in Pakistan in 2010. My question was, which census round is this Columbia University Center referring to? So I did reach out to them. They haven't got back to me yet because it's an ongoing exercise. So my first question is, which data source are they basing their findings on? And another critique that I have is, regardless of the data source, and even if the data source is right, my biggest critique is that you cannot possibly define urban the same way around the world because population densities differ, areas differ, socioeconomic backgrounds differ. So, for example, in their study, they suggest that uh, the country with the least number of urbanization, percentage was also above 70%. I was like, what does it mean? You know? So I do have some critiques on it, but it's an ongoing study. I'm working on it, and I don't have definitive remarks, but this is my research so far.
This is something I wanted to just share with you, that after seeing the presentation and the fact that we are talking about infrastructure imbalances, this is the first thing that came to my mind. And it's a very, again, I would say it's a very good platform to initiate the discussion, and I think it should be followed upon. Because when I first heard of the study, a thing came to my mind, which has been coming to my mind earlier. I live in Zone 4 in Islamabad. And if you look at the Bureau of Statistics, Zone 4 is defined as the rural area. But if you look at Zone 4, there are 4 divisions to it, 4A, 4B, 4C, 4D. Nearly all of the 4 have posh housing societies, and they were supposed to be the agricultural economy and all that, and you were supposed to have the farmhouses only there, and you had to preserve the water recharge. It's not so anymore. So maybe Zone 4 needs to be redefined. Maybe the thing that you're talking about is the right time to talk about it. And regarding your presentation, the second thing that comes to my mind is that since you're talking of Pakistan in general, when we talk of infrastructure imbalances, recently you might have heard of, or people in the House may know about it. Since after the 18th Amendment, the federal entity and the powers were constitutionally decentralized. So there are a lot of powers and roles that the provincial governments hold now, which is very good from an urban planner's perspective, I would say, which is very good, because the excise and tax collection should be at the provincial level, so that the people giving the tax are benefiting from it. And that is happening. That is true. And with that, of the recent studies that I've seen in Punjab, there has been a very big project about the master plans of intermediate studies, and around, I think, 20 or 22 studies, master plans have been redefined. We can question the things in the master plan. That is another thing, that what was addressed, what was not addressed, how were things defined, how were the city boundaries defined. But the initiative or the practice is there, which is, I think, a step forward for guided urbanization. Because as an urban planner, in my years of practice, how I see is that development will happen. You cannot control it, you cannot confine it. Yes, you can guide it. That's the only thing you can do. So I think urban infrastructure, the balance, I agree, it's mandatory. And how I see, and you've also mentioned this, how I approach is that it's more about the quality of life of people. Like even if you look in Islamabad, you go to F7 and you have those posh housing, and then you have the Kachi Abadi. So it's not, it's unregulated. And I think that what you need are like now in situ solutions. You cannot uproot people now anymore, and you have to like regularize or settle. And I think a little work is also going on this in dimension. I'm not very versant with the CDO right now, but I think some work is also going on in this dimension. But we need to, what I see is that we need to focus on improving the quality of life.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Risham Amjad. Thank you, Dr. Shafaat, for an excellent presentation that really set the context and really made me excited to answer questions and hear from you all. So my background is on an academic level, urban. My master's was in urban policy, urban and environment policy, and then my master's research or thesis was on informal housing in Karachi and deconstructing some of the mechanisms that create housing in Karachi as one of the many urban services that are provided by a city or a municipal government, or in Karachi's case, sometimes the provincial government. I think that it was a really valid question to kind of deconstruct the presumption of what is urban and what is not and what the data says. And I think as someone who engaged in a good amount of GIS research on Pakistan, it was always very difficult for me to come up with a compelling answer because of our data collection woes. And very often it was the 1999 census with some updated numbers that people were using, and it really didn't capture how dynamically Pakistan has changed, whether that's urban to rural or the many other shifts that have taken place culturally, socially. I think that the question of how the urban is defined is something that planners have been trying to answer for a long time, since the 20th century, when questions of zoning and land use became popular or became inevitable mechanisms to understand how cities work, especially large cities around the turn of the century in the West, particularly. There was London, there was New York, there was Glasgow. There was a lot that was written on how do you define or provide housing, or what is a municipal service that city should lawfully provide. Sometimes access to light was one, because they used to build extremely close back then. So there's that. And then I think to address some of the, sorry, your question was on
regarding the start numbers.
Yes, the start numbers. I feel like the like data collection in Pakistan is very political, and mapping cities is very political. If you take the example of Karachi, simply because I did a lot of my research on Karachi, and Karachi is a really fascinating microcosm of Pakistan, where a lot of the problems and solutions are then magnified. If you look at Aurangi, and if you look at the late Perveen Rahman's work in mapping the Aurangi settlements, if you don't know, she was an activist, and she worked with residents of Kachi Abadis to secure their land title or access to service provision. And of course, that was an extremely political thing to do in Karachi, where there are land mafias and gangs and even political involvement in the background. And that resulted in her unfortunate assassination. So mapping a city, whether that's Islamabad Zone 4 versus Zone 5, even Zone 5, I see everywhere. If you go to that area near Simli Dam, there are so many housing societies. Even that Margala DHA that's being made there, I believe that's right at that Zone 4, Zone 5 boundary. And an urban in Pakistan somehow the other only means elite. It doesn't mean inclusive. It doesn't mean equitable. It means nice houses that are bungalows. It doesn't refer to any, it's very sprawling. It's car driven. It's a big reason why we have air quality issues. So I'm actually pretty sure that the numbers would definitely be higher than 39%. I'm not sure if they would be near 80, simply because in my work in rural areas, the agriculture sector in Pakistan is thriving. And it can't do so without a significant population there driving it, just because of how labor intense our practices are in our part of the world. So I would be so fascinated to hear more about how this ends up turning out and your particular data collection.
Yeah, thank you so much. And the only reason for discussing these numbers, I know it gets confidential at times. Give your opinion on such reports. But as they say, if the map is wrong, any plan built on it will be flawed. And so that is one reason why we wanted to have your perspective of on these stark differences. Okay, another thing that one could highlight from Dr. Nawaz's presentation is that he mentioned three sectors in particular where infrastructural imbalances in Pakistan are most prevalent. One of them being the municipal services, the other one public health, and the third one housing. So next question is basically twofold, and it's from anyone who would like to address why these particular sectors are suffering most in terms of infrastructural imbalances, and what integrated policy approach would you propose to address their interconnected challenges and ensure, let's say, equitable development?
Actually, I think I would go to the area that you mentioned in the start, that was the
Yes.
municipal services. Well, I always approach things at more of a human scale. When we talk about the municipal services are for the people, and practically they are by the people. So whenever you are talking of municipal services, there is a, like, for example, let's take taxation. Let's take WAPDA electricity meters and bills. The services are there. I wouldn't say that there are no services. At least in the urban areas, services are there. They might be under service. There might be like a shortage of water supply. There might be a shortage on electricity supply, but the service is there. But as a people, how do we approach it? The major problem that, since I worked with some municipalities in I worked with NESPAC on major cities master plans, and the issues that we came up with were like, majorly people are not ready to pay for the service. Yes, we say that we are financially starved. Yes, we are fiscally challenged. But are we actually paying for even the services that we are getting? I think municipalities are, this is a very big question. Like, if a unregulated settlement has an electric connection, what would they like to do? The people would want to have the connection to remain like one, and 10 houses would be benefiting from it. So yes, we are to blame the municipality for not providing the connections, but we are to blame the people as well. How are we taking the services that we get? Same goes for education. Same goes for
Public health.
property taxation, for public health. If you have a public park, if the community or the municipality has provided a public park, how are we treating it? So I think that the question, like, the issue is not from the municipality or the organizations only. It is from them. It is from the management perspective. I don't say they're entirely free of any blames, but as a nation, I also see it, that how are we approaching it, how the services that are being provided. I live in a housing society, and they charge me a particular amount for the services of water services and the maintenance services. And we have this small community of ladies, and I've always had this issue with them, that they're like, 5,000 per month or 10,000 per month is like a lot of service charges. And I'm like, why it's a lot? I think it's inadequate. If you are to provide like 80 gardeners to the society, if you are to provide like around 50 cleaners to the society, and then you are getting the water supply, you should be paying for that. So this is another perspective.
right.
That's, I think, the way that we are fiscally challenged is, yes, we are economically challenged. Yes, the fact is there, but it's a two prong
Very right.
for me.
Would you like anyone?
So I have a slightly different take on this. I feel like if you don't have enforcement, or if the writ of the state is weak, people will take advantage, whether it's in the wealthiest and most educated of countries or in the poorest. So there is an institutional weakness that has haunted Pakistan's every institution, but particularly municipal service delivery, where people often are right to ask the question, well, I don't get water more than 2 or 3 times a week. I have to call tankers, or my electricity goes all the time, or there's gas load shedding. And we understand at a macro level why these things are happening. or the trash collectors did not come, why should I pay? I think then it becomes a very chicken and egg problem if you start blaming people when the issue is very much so of institutional weakness and perhaps even maliciously so. Because we all know that there is a politicization of local government. Come election season, promises are made to communities in exchange for votes, in exchange for political influence. And then afterwards, or before the election, roads are built and metros are built and infrastructure is, planned. And then afterwards, it all vanishes. And then people are once again saying, well, why should we pay? We were promised something, it wasn't given to us. So I think that the issues of inequity that kind of lurk underneath this about who has the right to the city, who belongs where, who can access what, and often cities or municipal governments or the political machinations of it all, they are often trying to barter with service provision for influence or for power. You will get water or you will get land title, or the many failed regularization schemes, both in Islamabad and at a larger scale in Karachi, just because of the large informal housing population there. I really find it, I find it very understandable if I have no certainty over whether or not I own my land, whether or not I own my house, that I've lived there, for 30 odd years, and it was made whatever on government land through an illegal housing society. 30 years later, I'm part of the city's social, cultural fabric. I contribute economically. I pay taxes, even if they're not, even if they're indirect taxes, I am there. And yet my contributions are devalued because I don't technically own that land, which I only got because it was hard for me to find formal, affordable housing for a lower income person. So I think there are some real fundamental questions about how we provide housing, what kind of housing is developed, if there is a park, who can access it, again, who has the right to the city? These are very pertinent questions in developing worlds where the aesthetic of how something looks is considered developed versus undeveloped. Like there are parts of E11 that have no municipal services. There are very fancy houses there. Residents have made their own private accommodations for that. And if you look at it from Google Maps, or if you just look at it side by side, you will not be able to tell which is the CDA area serviced by by the CDA municipal services, or which is basically unofficial. They have their own arrangements. It's like a private kind of situation, whatever it is. It's hard to make those distinctions when they are so aesthetically guided, and they're guided by income, and they are guided by access. So I think there's my sort of
Right.
the rub that comes to me when I think of the issue.
I mean, it's safe to say that we have both supply and demand constraints with concern to the infrastructural imbalances. Dr. Nawaz, if you would like to add, or should we?
I can just quickly say that I kind of situate myself in the middle of these two arguments, is because most of my professional colleagues work in these municipal governments, and many of them real good friends, real good human beings, right? And when you are having discussions with them informally, outside of the offices, and your questions are, why isn't your government able to perform, or your office is not doing what it's supposed to do? And there is a very pertinent question, is that are the resources that we are given versus the kind of responsibilities that we are supposed to perform, there's a big mismatch. And I cannot refute that argument because their numbers can, do affirm to their perspective. And that's why I think the reason why I'm suggesting that this reclassification of urban is a very essential first step is because at least these these areas sitting right next to the urban boundaries, which are already getting those trunk infrastructure because of those political pressures that they can manifest. But if they are officially made urban, that will at least strengthen our municipal governments, and they can take it from there. So at least that can be a first policy step, in my opinion.
Can I just
Sure,
add
sure.
here? So I think you are totally right on the money that there is a tax-based issue. You're of course familiar with the US, where every municipality is responsible for raising their own taxes, and then that informs education spending, roads, whatever maintenance, so on and so forth. And in Pakistan, we have had a first initial devolution as my distinguished panelists said, the 18th Amendment did devolve certain responsibilities between the federal and the provincial governments. But in my view, and I think with some friends and practitioners of mine who I've spoken to, both on the government and the non-government side, they say there is a third step of the devolution missing, whereby the local governments are linked with the provincial governments. And the way the NFC award distributes resources to the provinces and the way the provinces then use them for development or non-development expenditure is not tied to their tax collection as such. Property tax being another. And I know tax collection is a hot button issue in Pakistan at the best of times. But there is a missing layer there where municipalities are really not responsible for raising taxes. I bet if they were and they knew that that's the only way they were going to get new water pipes, or that's the only way the government schools or the public schools there would get funding, tax collection would be a real issue then, because you would have to figure out how to budget for your entire year and raise that revenue. And you would be responsible. Certain provincial and federal targets, as in other countries, would have to be met.
Totally agree with you there. There is this layer missing, and this brings me to the point that I've whatever panel or whatever platform I get, I do always raise this thing. How I approach it is that at the federal or say the national level or at the provincial level, everything is working in silos.
Yes.
The tax collection and the local government, they are working in their separate silos. So what we actually need from my perspective is that we have to have an integrated urban approach to things, maybe at the policy level, maybe at the ordinance level, at the provincial level. But we have to develop, like we do have those ministries, like climate change is working in silo, housing is working in silo, communications and infrastructure is working in silo. We don't have them integrated. Not at the, I don't think so after the 18th Amendment should be at the national, but at least it should be at the provincial level. I totally agree here. And I think that is something also that you can, by defining urban, I think the Risham just added a question of income as well. So I think is income level also defining urban? So this is where we need to see that what is the basic platform or the basic framework or the integrated approach that can be developed at the provincial levels, which can actually integrate. And I think there are things moving in this context, especially in case of Punjab, but still to a little extent.
Very right. And in addition to an integrated policy, as you mentioned, I believe there should be geographic rebalancing to attention and investment as well. Moving ahead, one thing that was touched upon in the last seminar that was held here, um, and the World Bank study has endorsed it as well, that Pakistan's infrastructural development disproportionately focuses on the megacities at the expense of the second tier cities. So, in this regard, what are the key long-term economic and social risks of this, geographic imbalance? And what strategic shift in policy is required to achieve a more sustainable and equitable urban framework? If anyone would like to address.
I think that is the need of the time. We must develop the mid-tier cities.
Right.
We cannot actually just focus on one or two agglomerations like Karachi and like a metropolitan, still a metropolis, Lahore, still not an agglomeration. We cannot actually focus on these two giants to actually make the whole country work.
Absolutely, yes.
So the question here is more of an economical question, I would say. It does relate to urban, but it actually cross bounds with economy.
Thanks.
That how are you driving the economy that will actually drive the urban development to these cities? And there have been different slogans like one city, there was something like this, one city, one product and stuff like that. But we actually need to work on what are the economical opportunities that can be created in cities, or they are already there that can be actually highlighted. And from economy, I don't mean retail, because what we are looking right now is real estate and real estate also in limbo now, but retail is the only economy that we are looking at right now. So what I think that needs to be worked on is like industrialization, and industrialization does not mean the hardcore industry anymore. It is the soft sectors, the AI based sectors, There is a lot of potential with the Pakistani youngsters, the ideas they're working on, and in AI especially, the way kids are working on. I think this is where we need to reconsider. We need to restructure the economic policies so that we can actually correlate the two, and then we can, sort of direct the urban development.
Very right. The reason for asking this question is the other day I was sitting with Dr. Nawaz to discuss his presentation. And growing up as a child, I've always wondered why only Islamabad, Lahore, and Karachi. We see a new university being developed, a new hospital being developed, but it's always one of the mega cities. So very rightly pointed out, if anyone would like to add to it before we move to the Q&A session.
Just this one. I'm afraid it's not a good news, but they say that if you don't develop a spatially equitable policy for balancing out your urbanization rates, what happens is that your megacities take up all of the burden, and as a result, what happens is that your quality of life in those areas deteriorates. So there is a curve. First, with the development of these cities, this curve goes up, but then citizens, they are not stupid people. They can see how their life is turning out to be in those cities. And so there is now an active scholarship around the world about shrinking cities. In our country, because we don't think about this problem because we are a very booming population, but shrinking cities is a phenomenon around the world, and it's happening. So in some way, I think these intermediate cities are now gonna get their place on the table by themselves because of how our country is turning out to be.
Right.
So this conversation is already, I think, overdue, and I think that's where conversations like these and research like this can maybe help lead that kind of conversation forward.
Regarding the one thing that I think, since we are discussing, so we will be looking at the negative issues and the problems, and we'll also be looking at the positive things that are already happening or like in the process. If I look at Sindh, I see that the social infrastructure, universities and health, they are providing in rural areas as well. So I think there is maybe some thinking change or whatever, but there is a little strive that is happening over there. I am very bad with remembering the project names and stuff, but there are two very large hospitals that have been created. I've been to Sakkar and I've been around in like rural areas of Sakkar, and I've seen 3, 4 mega universities over there. So I think this is, and I'm really happy to see that. Like South Punjab needs it, like KP needs it, like Balochistan needs it, GB needs it. I think it must be done, and it is like sort of striving up in Sindh and Punjab.
My name is Heather, and I work at PIDE as a macroeconomic researcher. So my question is from Dr. Nawaz. Um, First, I have a, uh, you said that there is a 38% urban rate by Pakistan Bureau of Statistics, and had you been, if I may say is right, had you been calculated it with some other definition, Pakistan urbanization rate would come up 88% or around 80%. So, but the question is still there. How do you define urbanization? You should have defined urbanization first, and then explained all those problems and the parameters later. But I think I couldn't get. Had you explained the urbanization definition or not? I just Googled it, and it raised three parameters. One is population. An urban unit must be more than 2,000 population units, and then it has it must have an economic hub. That means economic or economic activity really matters for an urban unit. A less economic a less economic unit could not be regarded as an urban unit. And the last one is physical connectivity. So if I use these three parameters to define urban units in Pakistan, even then I doubt that there could be 88% urbanization rate. So how do you think urbanization or urban unit can be defined? And how do you come up to this conclusion that it can go to 88% if that definition is used? So yeah, my basic question is this, but then we can always talk about, the problems of urbanization. I have been living in Islamabad for 35 years, and the radius of Islamabad was 5 kilometers. I know it's 20 to 25 kilometers, and uh, I don't like this urbanization process in Islamabad at all.
Thank you. And I think that is a very pertinent question. Let me say that I don't agree with either of these numbers. I don't agree with 39%, and I don't agree with 88%, because I see problems in both of these definitions. But your question about how do I define urban? I'm already working on it. We have this active project in PIDE. It's a big team. We are actually working with Pakistan Bureau of Statistics to actually come up with a contextualized definition. Because before this, our last exercise in Pakistan was in 2011 by the urban. It was led by the Urban Unit Punjab, and they came up with a definition of 5 different parameters. And you've mentioned 3 of those. I'll just help you refine them a bit. For example, about the economic activity, they mentioned that uh, at least more than 50% of the population needs to have non-agricultural income sources for an urban area to be defined as, for an area to be defined as urban. Likewise, you're right about the infrastructural connectivity. It was about the contiguous lands, and they defined contiguous as the one that was surrounded by already built up areas, at least from 3 sides. So if one side is empty, that's fine. That can be the next contiguous rural area, but other areas are or have to be urban. In 2011, when they conducted that exercise, because it was led by the Urban Unit Punjab, it was disseminated to the other governments, but they were not legally required to follow that definition. The result is that even now, each of the provincial governments, they have their own local government ordinances or acts, and they all of them define urban differently. So in Pakistan, we have many different urban definitions. The way the World Bank study defined urban, I don't agree with it because they are using a threshold which is consistent around the world. But the question of how I define urban is something I'm doing research on, and I don't know as of now. And a little comment on your anecdote about urbanization rate in Islamabad is what I was saying earlier, that people can see that these cities are growing at such a rate that there's a level to which we can bear with this fact. Otherwise, maybe people might choose intermediate cities to live their life in. So yeah, I'll stop there.
I just it is for my understanding. मुझे सिर्फ ये जानना है कि do we really need to explicitly define urban and rural? Because as you have discussed, the main source of income is, if not agriculture, then we define one of the dimension is to define that household as belonging to urban. So to my understanding, there are so many other categories. If we just define that non-rural is categorized as urban, that is not आई थिंक जस्टिफाइड. तो हमारे पास जो इकोनॉमिक्स के इंडिकेटर्स होते हैं, मोस्टली हम बहुत सारी चीज़ों में, जैसे प्रोविंसेस के अलावा हर इंडिकेटर को रूरल अर्बन में, स्पेशली इन सोशो इकोनॉमिक इंडिकेटर्स, हम डिफाइन कर रहे होते हैं. बट डेफिनेटली अर्बन इज सो मच कॉन्ट्रोवर्शियल. So why don't we define some subcategories? Like we have some semi-urban areas or peri-urban areas. Why can't we go on that?
I think I can start answering, and then maybe the panel can help me here. I totally agree. With the first part, do we really need to define urban? Or maybe let's not even define anything as urban or rural. We have done this exercise in 2001. This definition, this discrimination between urban and rural was abolished, and it was reenacted in 2010, because the problem was that many of the municipalities were confronted with this challenge ke kaun se area hamare preview mein aata hai, so there's another governance mechanism and struggle over there. But I do totally agree with your other point, is ke we don't really need to define only urban and rural. And is point ke upar this World Bank study, their approach does this. That's why they call it the degrees of urbanization approach. So they defined it 5 categories, from urban to rural and peri-urban, second tier cities, contiguously built up areas, and as such. तो आई थिंक हम जो अभी ऑनलाइन जो ऑनगोइंग हमारा प्रोजेक्ट है उसमें भी हमारी सिमिलर ही फीलिंग है कि मे बी वी मे नीड टू कम अप विद अ वेरिएटेड अप्रोच इंस्टेड ऑफ हैविंग दिस बाइनरी.
आई फील के मे बी हमें डिफाइन करने की ज़रूरत होगी फ्रॉम वेयर आई सी इट राइट नाउ. मे बी शफात कैन कन्विंस अस लेटर ऑन कि नहीं, कोई ज़रूरत नहीं है डिफाइन करने की. देयर आर बेटर वेज टू हैंडल दिस. बेसिकली इट्स अबाउट द फ्यूचर. मेरे हिसाब में कि कोई भी आपका अगर शहर है, चाहे वो छोटा है चाहे वो बड़ा है, उसने डेवलप होना है. आपने उसका कोई 5 टर्म का 10 साल का कोई ना कोई प्लान बनाना है. उसमें क्या क्या प्रोजेक्ट्स होने चाहिए. ठीक है, अगर उसको आपने इस लेवल तक रखना है कि आपने एक गांव है फॉर एग्जांपल 400 घरों का, और आपने उसको एक हाई स्कूल तक रखना है, या आपने उसको एक यूनिवर्सिटी देनी है. ठीक है, बेसिकली आपने वो फ्यूचर गाइड करना है. उस गाइडिंग के लिए अर्बन रूरल की डेफिनेशन, या आप उसको अर्बन कहें, पेरी अर्बन कहें, रूरबन कहें, देयर इज आल्सो, यू मस्ट हैव हर्ड, देयर रूरबन एरियाज लाइक everything is rural, and then you have a centralized small, for example, बेस्ट वे सीमेंट का एक प्लांट लग गया है, या फौजी फर्टिलाइजर कहीं लग गया है. ठीक है, तो उसके अंदर एक पूरी एक अर्बन एंटिटी एग्जिस्ट करती है. वो तो अर्बन है बिकॉज उनके पास एक हॉस्पिटल भी होगा, उनके पास एक अच्छा कॉलेज भी होगा, उनके पास सारी सोशल इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर, म्यूनसिपल सारी सर्विसेज होंगी. लेकिन जो साइड पे पूरा एरिया होगा वो एग्रीकल्चर होगा या रूरल होगा. तो उस एरिया को आप रूरबन कहते हैं. मतलब एक डेफिनेशन है, देयर इज अ वे ऑफ अप्रोचिंग थिंग्स. बट मेरे लिए जो इम्पोर्टेंट फैक्टर है वो ये है कि वो जो भी एरियाज हैं जिनको हम देख रहे हैं, हमने उन्हें ले के कहाँ जाना है. और क्योंकि इन चीज़ों का लिंक, जैसे पहले ही मेंशन हुआ, इन चीज़ों का लिंक आपकी टैक्सेशन से है. इन चीज़ों का लिंक एक्चुअली आपकी इनकम जनरेशन से है. तो जब तक आप इन चीज़ों को वाजे नहीं करेंगे, वही होगा जो हो रहा है. नो नो नो, देखिए रिच, अच्छा एक और चीज़, आप स्विट्जरलैंड जाएं, डेफिनेटली आप में से बहुत से लोग गए होंगे, तो आपको जिसको मेजरली एग्रीकल्चर या रूरल एरिया कहेंगे, आपको वहाँ स्टेट ऑफ आर्ट अस्पताल मिलेगा, आपको वहाँ पानी मिलेगा गर्म ठंडा, आपको स्कूल मिलेंगे, आपको हर सोशल और पब्लिक और फिजिकल इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर मिलेगा, एक्सेसिबिलिटी मिलेगी, होम टू होम मिलेगी. बहुत ज़्यादा स्नो हो रही है, उसकी हैंडलिंग के लिए म्यूनसिपैलिटी मिलेगी. इसका ये मतलब हुआ कि सर्विस प्रोविजन का ये मतलब नहीं है कि आप अर्बन हैं या आप रूरल हैं. जैसे हमारे यहाँ हो गया कि अस्पताल नहीं है तो रूरल एरिया है. ठीक है, तो इट्स, मैं इसको इस तरह अप्रोच करती हूँ कि इट्स मोर अबाउट कि आपने चीज को लेके कहाँ जाना है, उस पे आपको शायद इनको डिफाइन करना होगा. एंड मे बी I'd love to volunteer to your research. If there is any way I could contribute, I would love to contribute, because I think it's the need of the hour.
Thank you so much. I'm Farah. Discussion was really good. All of you people have majorly having the lens from the urban perspective. But isko thoda sa, because I am having my expertise in rural transformation from the rural economy side, तो मैं इसको थोड़ा सा अगर रूरल लेंस से थोड़ी सी डिस्कशन करूँगी, I'll take less time. कि जब हम रूरल ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन की बात करते हैं तो वी आर हैविंग डिफरेंट इंडिकेटर्स थ्रू विच हम रूरलिटी को डिफाइन करते हैं और ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन की बात करते हैं. फिर रूरल में हम मेजरली अर्बन को कैटेगराइज करते हैं कि जो अर्बन डोमिनेंट है वो रूरल है. अब यहाँ पर रूरल ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन के एंगल से या लेंस से अगर हम अर्बनाइजेशन की तरफ मूव करें ना, तो हम कहते हैं कि जो इंडिकेटर्स रूरलिटी को डिफाइन कर रहे हैं या रूरल ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन की रिक्वायरमेंट है, उनकी जो एडवांस स्टेज है, एडवांस स्टेज ऑफ रूरल ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन, जो कि हम स्टेज 4 जिसको बोलते हैं, इट्स ऑल द डेवलपमेंट थेरीज आई एम रेफरिंग टू. सो दैट मीन्स कि जहाँ जाके बाइफर्केशन बिटवीन रूरलिटी एंड रूरल एंड अर्बन ख़त्म हो जाती है. ठीक है, जैसे मैम ने बात की कि इट्स नॉट अबाउट द सर्विसेज, तो फिर वो सर्विसेज इतनी इक्विटेबल हैं दैट यू आर नॉट गोइंग टू identify the certain area that this is the rural area because not being provided with certain services and this is the urban area because provided the services. Rather आपकी जो मार्केट है, आपकी जो इकोनॉमी है, वो इतनी अच्छी क्लब करके आपका रूरल अर्बन लिंकेज इतना स्ट्रांग हो जाता है कि यू लेफ्ट वेरी लेस नीड टू आइडेंटिफाई द स्टफ, आइडेंटिफाई द एरियाज के ये तो आपके स्पेशल रूरल है तो रूरल ही रहेंगे. इट्स अ ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन प्रोसेस. और इसमें आई डिड अ स्टडी वे आई looked at the spatial analysis over the time for the case of Pakistan. और ऐसे areas हैं पाकिस्तान में, जहाँ पर अब अदर देन डेफिनेशन बट देयर आर चेंजेस, जहाँ पर रूरल डेवलपमेंट हुई है, रूरल ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन हुई है, और मेजरली हुई है वेयर पीपल आर मूविंग फ्रॉम फार्म सेक्टर्स टुवर्ड्स द ऑफ फार्म सेक्टर्स. ऑफ फार्म में आपके पास रूरल इंडस्ट्रीज भी आ जाती हैं. सम पीपल ऑल्सो डू सम काइंड ऑफ माइग्रेशंस एज वेल टुवर्ड्स द अदर सेंटर्स. So that is also something that is a subject of development economics and very much important. So definitions are very important, but along with that, when in the process of development आप rural की side से move करते हो, तो again the stage 4 of development for the sake of transformation says that they left no kind of precise or very much border left between urban and rural. Thank you so much.
आई एग्री. और मैं ये भी कहूंगी कि आपकी इस बात से एक और चीज, जो एक और पर्सपेक्टिव ऐड होता है, वो आपका सोशल और कल्चरल पर्सपेक्टिव है. फॉर एग्जांपल, सिंध के बहुत से एरिया में क्लाइमेट इतना हार्श होगा कि आपकी ड्रेसिंग या आपके घर की दीवार मिट्टी की बनेगी, आपकी ड्रेसिंग अकॉर्डिंगली डोमिनेट होगी, जो कि अगर आप कोई शहरी उस ड्रेसिंग को देखेगा तो कहेगा ये तो रूरल ड्रेसिंग है या देसी ड्रेसिंग है. तो मेरे हिसाब में जब रूरल ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन की आप बात कर रहे हैं, तो रूरल रूरल रहे, अपनी कल्चर से भी आइडेंटिफाई हो, अपने क्लाइमेट से भी हो या ना हो, दिस इज ऑल्सो अनदर थिंग दैट मस्ट बी कंसिडर्ड.
Gee, I totally agree with that. And just to add, I think I'm not that familiar with rural and urban transformation theories. Of course, you're studying it, but एक component land use का भी तो होता है. I mean, in many countries, they have been very segregated about how they allow zoning to happen and how they allow buildings to be constructed around a particular boundary of a city. Like growth boundaries are a very common conception, especially where they want to keep the peri-urban area peri-urban. So again, that definition is important. Like in the UK, when they were looking at city planning or urban planning, for them, the British conception of the countryside was so important that they said the countryside has to look like the countryside, feel like the countryside, and a British town should look like a little British town or village, and a city should look like a city. So they became very stringent about the zoning at the edges of the city and about the kind of buildings that were allowed to be constructed there, and about the usage, like whether that was industrial or chemical or retail or whatever. There were certain things that were not allowed to keep that segregation. So I don't think the rural area needs to transform necessarily into the urban, but as Fauzia said, it is about service provision. You can still find excellent hospitals, and you can still find good schools, and you can still find employment opportunities, whether they're remote or however they are. But, a rural area is rural for more reasons than, the fact that there's a hospital or not there.
The markets are as well established. Like if, for example, farmers have to sell their produce, they do not only go to the other markets, rather they themselves the markets are much developed than, or even the industry or linkages and backward and forward linkages and value chains, they are so much established that they by sitting at their own spaces, they are just provided with everything there. Because there's a very successful example of such scenario in China and Vietnam, where they left no differences, because whoever living in rurality, they are enjoying whatever the countryside's environment is, but along with that, they are not lagged behind in development, they are not lagged behind in markets, they are not lagged behind in their businesses. They are equally privileged as the people in the centers or megacities are.
So there's a spatial component definitely to the sale of goods and services and value chains, linkages, what kind of logistics infrastructure you have, especially for transporting. Like we're an agricultural country, perishable agricultural products from rural area to the city and then for export or however. So I mean, there will never be certain एक किस्म की जो मंडी लगती है वो एक एरिया में ही लगेगी. Like maybe the linkages will get better. So I take your point. But China was also extremely strict with their urban segregation. In the 90s, they had a very strict policy. I forget what it's called, but you were at the time of your birth, you were assigned to the particular place you were born, and then you had to get a permit to move to a larger city. And so the movement of their people was extremely regulated, and they knew at all times what percentage of the city of their population population was in so-called rural areas or areas that were being transformed in urban areas, and they knew how much to develop and when to develop. And for a while, it was extremely difficult. When this transition stage was going on, there were not adequate facilities. Parents were leaving their children. You know, there was a whole grandparents raised generation of Chinese people. So I think because they were extremely specific about how they defined it and what kind of movement they allowed because of the nature of their government. So, you know, China is one kind of example, definitely.
I think that was Hokyu system, HOKU, Hokyu system. Yeah, it was one of the world's, infamous and notorious system of controlling your population. And I'm personally not in favor of that governance model.
Dr. Saab, I would just like to add just one
Sure,
more
please.
last thing. I think all this discussion complicates your research even further. Okay. So best of luck.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Varda, and I am an MPhil research scholar here at PIDE. There are these buzzwords like smart cities and phrases of the like that have been going on. So, given our current constraints, should Pakistan focus on high-tech solutions or first master the basics where debates are still hovering over definitions?
Are you done with the question?
Yes, I am.
Okay, good. Very valid point. I think the answer to this is also multi-tongue. There are places where we need the basics of the basics. And that's where we should be focusing on the basics. And then there are places where you have so much empowered and educated community that can actually go for these smart solutions. So we should not be focusing on one thing only. पाकिस्तान को एक solution की जरूरत नहीं. There are things according to the space, वही urban rural की जो आपकी definition होगी, जो requirements हैं, हमें सारी चीजों को लेके चलना है. This is what I believe.
And this is just a comment, not really an answer, but I think Pakistan is a very stratified country. So these conversations, you know, where there is a need for smart cities or for that kind of technology on the same hand as, you know, only having perhaps a basic health unit in a village, not even that fully equipped. You know, there's two conversations to be had at all times because of the immense amount of inequity we have in our country.
I'll just say कि मेरा perspective ये है कि in some ways these are not just buzzwords but they are the need of the hour. और बहुत सारी चीज़ों में even if it is a rural and most backward area of Pakistan, but we need to change our practices in some ways. For example, agriculture sector में, right? I think you're thinking of the same example कि वो जो burn करने वाला है process वो हमारी rural areas में सबसे ज़्यादा air quality को deteriorate कर रहा है, and we need to move away from that, and that is a step towards moving towards smart approaches. So it doesn't have to be necessarily high tech work everywhere, but we are at a stage कि जहाँ पे and again आप जब दुनिया में different models देखते हैं, different countries देखते हैं, we are a very populous country. So we need to move smartly, even if we don't have lots of technology or whatever. So
Very right, very right. Thank you so much.